Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Wendy Piaquinto, the Outreach and Events Coordinator at the Center for Undergraduate Research and Academic Engagement. Thank you all for joining us for the 2025 Summer Research Day. Today we have 7 student presenters. We'll go through them quickly. Sia Kakkar, Kenneth Bevan, Lily Pan, Abigail Goering, Elliott Redcay, Jane Cohen, and Alejandro Valdivia.
All right, so my name is Sia Kakkar. I'm a sophomore entering junior year, and I'm majoring in computational biology. And my project is on SMART NF1. The title of it is pretty long. It's Daily Neurobehavioral Function and Lifestyle Predictors for Neurofibromatosis Type 1. And my director is Yang Hao from the Development, Environment, and Resilience Lab. Okay, so first things first, NF1, what is it? The full name is neurofibromatosis type 1. It's a genetic disorder that causes tumors to grow on the covering of nerves anywhere in the body. As you can see, it's pretty rare. It's around 1 in 3,000 births. So that's why a lot of people have no idea what NF1 is when I say I'm studying it. But another reason it's pretty rare is that it can affect the body in a number of ways. So no two cases look the same. So I put a little infographic just to see what kind of effects it can have. So if it affects the brain, the nerves in the brain, it can cause seizures, headaches. If it affects your heart, you can have high blood pressure. So the severity range also differences. Like obviously a high blood pressure is nothing fatal, but if it affects your brain, you could have more severe side effects. So the physical symptoms are very well documented. As you can see here, we know a lot about what is NF1, but we don't know much about how we can help the quality of lives of people who have NF1 because there actually is no cure for NF1. So the whole purpose of this study is to look into those other factors that can help improve the quality of life of people with NF1. Um, so yeah, and then like as you can see, just like eye, lip, because we have so many nerves in our bodies, it can affect any of those nerves. Okay, so our study objective is to identify modifiable factors to inform interventions for people with NF1. So things such as like familial support, sleep patterns, physical activity, and how they can affect their daily lives in people with NF1. Specifically, our study, we study adolescents with NF1, but we have a wide range of studies. So we have adults, we have elderly people, we study all of those age ranges. Okay, and then so getting into how exactly we study this. So our whole study is actually online. It's through Zoom mainly. So we obviously first collect our participants, 13 to 17-year-old. We confirm that they have an NF1 diagnosis. And then the first thing we do is we have an introductory meeting, of course. So that's what I do as a research assistant in the lab. I'll have the introductory meeting. I'll go over all the consent forms. I'll go over pretty much what they have to do so that they have a good idea of what they need to do. The actual study is 2 weeks only. The total setup can take around 3 to 5 months, but just to like get stuff set up, the consent forms, deliver the Fitbits. After we have the introductory meeting and they know what they need to do, we'll have the baseline survey. So that's pretty much getting to know the adolescent, getting to know the parent. So like what psychosocial factors, lifestyle factors, their clinical disease, their demographics. So getting a better idea of who they are as a person. And then after they finish the baseline survey, we will deliver them a Fitbit. So the Fitbit is to track their sleep and physical activity. And that can take around 2 days just to deliver and set it up. And then now to the actual study. After we have all of that set up, they have the Fitbit, they've completed the consent forms. We have a 2 week assessment where they download an app on their phone. It's called EMA, and they have around 3 to 4 surveys per day. Each survey takes around 5 minutes. So just like you're getting a notification on their phone on your phone, they will get a notification saying, "Oh, it's time to complete your survey." So they'll click on the survey. It'll ask a couple questions about their lifestyle factors. So an example of a question that I can think of is like, "Oh, have you made anyone happy today? How was your quality of sleep?" Simple things like that that just assess like what they've done throughout the day and how we can help improve it. Um, and so as you can see, this is a more detailed version of our whole setup and training. So for the 2 week assessment, they'll have on school days, they'll have like 2 before and after school and a nightly survey. Non-school days, it'll be more frequent because they have more free time. And then we also combine this with the Fitbit activity. Okay. So again, the whole emphasis of this study is that it's multi-level. So we want to link the Fitbit and the surveys together. So obviously the lifestyle, the sleep duration, quality will all be tracked by the Fitbit. The neurobehavioral part of the surveys includes cognitive tasks. So we'll have them match a letter to a number, like 1 to A, or we'll have them do simple cognitive tasks. I've done the surveys before, they don't take too long. And then we also have them do emotion regulation skills just to see like how emotionally mature they are. And then psychosocial is more just the basics that we covered in the baseline survey about their family at home and their social support and their emotional well-being. Okay. And our study is currently still in progress. So we haven't published our findings. We haven't solidified our findings yet. We're at around 250 participants with data collected. We have over the summer, we have like 100 new more participants, which we're going to conduct that in the fall. And once we have enough data, we're going to publish our findings. But as of right now, some trends that we've seen, they seem a little obvious. It's like, oh, of course, like higher physical activity leads to better emotional regulation. But there actually are no studies that solidify these findings to help improve their quality of life of people with NF1. So a little bit more, poor sleep quality will lead to higher emotional distress and cognitive difficulties and greater parental support, improved behavioral outcomes. So yeah, this is a more detailed of everything that goes into each of these factors, but the whole point is to link all of these factors together and create a solidified intervention plan for them. Because finding a cure for NF1 obviously is not an easy thing to do. So right now we just want to make sure that while they're working on that cure, we have them live a better life. We have them with a certain intervention that will help improve their quality of life. Okay. And then as far as clinical significance, this is real-time data, so it'll inform personalized care. So we don't want one set intervention for everybody with NF1, because like I said, NF1 can look different in every single person. So we want to inform this personalized care and improve their quality of life based on, that's why we go through this 40-minute long survey. We have survey every single day, all this cognitive and social and parental, so many factors that we have to consider to make it more personable to the person with NF1. Okay. And then our next steps as of so far, like I said, we're expanding our sample size and extending monitoring periods. So hopefully by the end of fall, we have enough data to solidify our findings. And then farther down the line, we want to integrate neuroimaging just to examine, it is a genetic disorder, so just to examine the brain and how it can correlate to these findings. And then, of course, the final overall we want to do is to develop these personable interventions for sleep and physical activity for people with NF1. Okay, and then these are my acknowledgements. My mentors, Dr. Yang Ho and Dr. Matthew Yomnick. I'd like to thank them and my Dear Lab team, also all the participants that participated in this study. Thank you so much. And any questions? I'd love to answer any questions if anyone has it.
Yeah, we have about 3 minutes for questions. If anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat or just ask them directly.
But so I was going to say to the how this might culminate is the future some years ahead that it might be in the hands of say a specialist, a neurologist or something like that that has a diagnosed person and they put them through this assessment and then be able to give them practical advice.
Yeah, so obviously all our data is we have them consent to releasing their data if they do want care. A lot of participants actually ask us, oh, like, will we be able to see these results? And yes, we'll actually be able to use these results for their personable care because we don't want them just participating and not, like gaining anything out of it. The whole point is to improve the person with NF1's quality of life. So we would hand it to a clinical provider, have them create a personable intervention. But obviously we would be involved with it because we've talked to the participants, so it would be kind of a duo type of thing.
Nice to be a part of a project where you can see the tangible end result and benefit
Yeah,
from.
it's really cool. I really enjoy this project. Um, I have a question in the chat. Why was the study focused on this age group specifically? Yeah, so I said basically we have a lot of different studies. So we have in adolescents with NF1, we have elderly people with NF1, we have adults with NF1. So we pretty much have studies for every single age group because we want to cover everybody with NF1. And yeah. Any other questions?
I've got one. You mentioned it was found in 1 in 3,000 births.
Mhm.
So is it something that is found at birth, or can it be detected later in life? Can someone have this genetic marker and it not show up? And are there variables on how it presents itself?
Yeah, so it is a genetic disorder, so most often it will show up right at birth because it's a marker that it's neurofibromin, which is a protein that can lead to tumors. Pretty much it's kind of like cancer in a sense that it causes tumors. So most cases it is detectable at birth, but there are some cases where similar to cancer where it's not detected till later on in life. Most people don't get a late diagnosis. That's why we also have the elderly study because those are people that did not even know they had NF1 till later on in life.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sia. We are moving on to our next presenter, Kenneth. So Kenneth, whenever you're ready, you can share your screen.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Kenneth Bevan. I'm a senior. I'm majoring in cybercriminology here at FSU in the College of Criminology and Criminal Justice. Plan to graduate this semester, August 1st, and then move on in the fall to grad school majoring in criminology. After that, I plan to move back home to Orlando and get some local level policing experience there, and then eventually move up to the FBI and work on their National Counter Cyberterrorism Task Force using my degree for good. Today, I want to present my research on disability homicides. I worked with the UROP program, and I did this under Dr. Lance and Dr. Winger. Let me get to my screen so I can switch. A little bit about the background of this research. We've known that there's always been violence against people with disabilities always throughout history. However, we don't always know the reason of why it happens. There are a lot of times where it goes unnoticed, unknown, and some simply just not documented. However, we want to create a database of known disabled people who have experienced homicides. This isn't always fair to the disabled people because they don't necessarily do anything to cause their suffering. However, there are often family members, caregivers, and even friends of the family who execute these homicides against disabled people, either as a hate crime because they have something against disabled people, or they simply just don't like the individual person. During our research period, a team of undergraduate researchers, including myself, have looked at many media reports, news reports, court cases, and things of the like to identify any possible variables that we could use to predict any future homicides and prevent them. To begin our methodology, we had to start with a database of names. A database of names was given to us by Dr. Lance. He used the Disability Day of Mourning website as an open source information to give us a database of all these names of people who we know have experienced homicides. However, this database didn't have all the information about them. They had some sources, including why they were killed, but they didn't have any information about location or things of the like. So we used open source coding data techniques to Google their names and any potential keywords, including homicide, death, disability, to find any news articles or media reports. Oftentimes, when something exciting happens, the news is going to cover it, and then that's how we got a lot of our information from them. We try to include a lot of information about the victim and the perpetrator or perpetrators. Oftentimes, there are many victims involved or perpetrators involved in the same case. Sometimes there will be one perpetrator for multiple victims, and also the opposite, where there will be multiple victims for the same perpetrator. To continue our methodology, we assigned each case a unique incident ID. This identified one incident with a perpetrator. So this meant that if there were multiple victims in the same incident, they'd all be grouped together under the same incident ID number. Each coder did one case at a time as to not confuse themselves and keep themselves focused on the priority. We use an online search engine, mostly Google, but occasionally going to other search engines if Google didn't have the answers we were looking for. And we were looking for things like death, disability, and other keywords that would enlighten us to what happened to these individuals. Sometimes, especially in the beginning of our coding project, there was a time where we didn't know how to code a specific variable. For example, I coded a case where the person experienced a homicide at their home, but then their body was left at the bottom of a lake. We didn't know what to do with this information yet, as to we put the location as the death in the home or if the death was in the lake. But working with the other undergraduate researchers and under Dr. Lance and Dr. Winger, we were able to kind of conceptualize and operationalize definitions so that we keep the data coding consistent between all of the different undergraduate researchers. We identified 4 key themes that have come out of the project so far. We are still working on our findings discussion, but we want to identify the 4 themes that we found so far and what we've coded. The theme 1 is failure of CPS to successfully intervene and prevent a homicide from occurring. This can also include adult protective services for the adults. For example, Amora, her mother reported to CPS twice that there was her mother had been reported to CPS twice before her death that there were issues. However, CPS allowed Amora to remain in her mother's care, which ultimately led to her death. Another example is William. His grandsons murdered him because they were his caretakers. However, APS did nothing to prevent this. Our second theme is murder-suicide. This is where a victim experiences the homicide and then the perpetrator kills themselves afterwards. For example, in Gabby's case, Gabby was found dead due to blunt force trauma and strangulation. When investigating her fiance's belongings, police found a journal where he confessed to murdering her and committing suicide. This shows how there are often times where a victim couldn't do anything to prevent themselves, and there's no justice for the perpetrator because they've decided to commit suicide. In Noah's case, he had an altercation with his son, and his son shot him while he was in the hospital, and then decided to turn the gun on himself. Again, very similar to Gabby, there's no justice for the perpetrator. Theme 3 is neglect of disabled persons. We don't have any specific pictures for this because the disabled persons are often not found in good condition when their bodies are discovered. This can often result with elderly people being discovered in their homes or even children discovered. In one case, the one case I found was in a closet. In Ethan's case, he was found in a pond. This was similar to the case I was describing before. And for Chelsea and Connor, they were siblings. They had previous CPS incidents. However, the perpetrator was charged with second-degree murder because she simply neglected the children. Our final theme is alleged mercy killings. Some of these are more straightforward than others. For example, one case I coded, there was a signed and notarized affidavit from a husband and wife couple saying that if the wife experienced illness to a certain point, she wanted to be taken out by her husband so that she wouldn't suffer any longer. These mercy killings are deemed sometimes illegal, sometimes legal, depending on the state and the laws surrounding them. However, the important thing is that these mercy killings are done from a place of love, at least according to what the perpetrator claims, because they want to put the victim out of their suffering. In Donna's case, she had Alzheimer's, and her husband decided to shoot her and then kill himself, also tying to the murder-suicide theme. And finally, in Jamie's case, her husband claimed his wife had asked him to kill her to end her pain. Now, this research is important because we also want to find possible policy implications to fix this in the future. One of the main goals of the College of Criminology is to look for these policy implications to prevent future criminal justice incidents from occurring. So one of them that we want to do is identify potential red flags that cause violence. If we can identify these red flags, we can possibly prevent future homicides against disabled persons. We also want to create a comprehensive database that other researchers can use in their own research. There are enormous possibilities with this data, and we want to be able to share and publish it so that others can use it as well. Finally, we want to raise awareness. A lot of people don't know the high prevalence of disability homicides, and we want to make sure that this can be shared with the general public so that they can understand how big of an issue it is. There's plenty of literature discussing disabilities and homicides, and a lot of references here will connect the two together. Thank you. If you have any questions, please feel free to share.
Thank you, Kenneth. Yeah, so we have about 4 minutes for questions. If anybody has them, feel free to throw them in the chat or just ask them directly. Yep, go ahead, Liz. Oh, sorry. She was just clapping. Alicia in the chat asked, do you have any data about mental health of the caretaker?
Yes, so for the mental health of the caretaker, we've often found that they do have mental disabilities. A lot of them are found in a worsened condition. They've been previously admitted to state hospitals, or they also have previous criminal charges. A lot of these caretakers aren't qualified to take care of these people with disabilities, but no one does anything to stop it. Time period, what time period are you considering for cases in your study? Are they exclusively modern, or do you analyze historical cases as well? So we started in 2024 on the Disability Day of Warning's website, and each case goes further back in time. We are currently back to 2016. This website goes back to, I believe, 2012, and our goal is to eventually code all the cases that they have. We're finding more and more data on current cases. However, the further back in time we go, it's harder to find information, and a lot of the information gets locked because it's historically archived by these news sources since it's not as current. Question from Sandra, what coding language was used in your project? We've used, when I say coding, it doesn't necessarily mean like coding language like a Java or C++, Python, computer coding like that. This means coding variables. So we have different columns in an Excel sheet for name, age, date of birth, things like that. And then we're inserting our data that we find into there, and we're calling it a coding process. And then we also have some dummy variables, like was this a mercy killing? 0 or 1, which is like yes or no. And then we're able to use this. Eventually, it will go into Stata, which is a statistical analyst program, and we'll use that to conclude our further findings.
Great. Any other questions? Yeah, do you plan to utilize this data to advocate for improved support for services like CPS?
Absolutely, we do. In addition to improved support for them, we also want to give recommendations to them as to what they've been doing well and where they can improve. We know that CPS exists to help the children stay protected, and while it's important to keep them funded and make sure that they know what their objectives are, there are also opportunities for improvement, and we want to make sure that we can support their ideas.
Great. Thank you so much, Kenneth.
Thank you.
All right. So moving along, our next presenter is Lily Pan. So Lily, whenever you're ready, go ahead and share your screen.
Okay. Can everyone see it okay?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Lily Pan. I am a current sophomore and a rising junior. I am currently studying biochemistry as a pre-dental student. So I first came across this topic when I was speaking to Dr. Glukov under his guidance for research about Alzheimer's patients and caregivers' mental health. He had asked me a really great question, if there is any connection between dentistry and Alzheimer's. And I found myself kind of stuck on that question because as a dental assistant, I had to take a course of dental assisting, and I remember there being a very short chapter of how to build relationships with special circumstance patients. And so I had replied that the small chapter kind of indicates that there is a gap to connect. And I think I'm graciously put in that position where I can kind of be that bridge. And I think it's also important to note that I am also a nursing assistant in a memory care unit, and I have about 1,000 hours. So I think with my experience and my passion for dentistry, I can provide kind of an opportunity to connect these two. So with that said, my research today is between dental care and brain health. So, did you forget to brush your teeth? It might be more than that. These are the topics we're going to cover today. WMHs, the research that exists today, periodontitis, tooth loss, and takeaways. So, what are WMHs? WMH stands for white matter hyperintensity, and they are bright spots on a brain MRI that may indicate damage to the white matter. So, this is an image of a brain MRI, and on the left, you can see normal white matter activity, and then on the right, inflammation of white matter. So, white matter of the brain plays a critical role in processing information, connecting regions, and sending and receiving signals, problem solving, learning, and balance. Conditions that impact white matter can cause significant cognitive impairment. A two-stage study from 2006 to 2016 found individuals with poor oral health had higher WMH volume and wore white matter architecture profiles. What does poor oral health in this study mean? So, in this study, poor oral health was coined as individuals who sustain dentures or loose teeth. In Rivier's study in 2023, he found among study participants, 5,417 had poor oral health and 9% had increase in WMH volume. And the image in the background can show that progression. So let's take a closer look to how oral health impacts the brain. Poor oral health, specifically periodontitis and tooth loss, has been found to increase the risk for cognitive decline and dementia. Periodontal treatment has been found to have a favorable effect on Alzheimer's disease, AD-related brain atrophy. Periodontitis disease is a severe gum infection that can lead to tooth loss. It is common but preventable, and the most common cause is poor oral hygiene habits. So, to put that in more simple term, when people don't brush their teeth, that can cause gum inflammation, and that bacteria attacks the bone, which leads to bone loss. And when you have that decreasing structure, it's hard for your gums to maintain a healthy tooth. So that can cause to mobility, pain, and eventually extraction. So here is another definition. So bacterial infection of the gum can lead to inflammatory mediators that enter the bloodstream and cause systemic inflammation. Systemic inflammation has been associated with disruptions in white matter architecture. Inflammatory mediators are released during inflammation, and they intensify and propagate the inflammatory response. This can be both beneficial or detrimental. An example of inflammatory mediators being beneficial is that they attract immune cells to an injury site for wound healing and tissue repair. On the other hand, they can be detrimental because they can cause overproduction and unregulated production, which can lead to diseases such as cancer, arthritis, and autoimmune diseases. Systemic inflammation here is defined as widespread inflammatory response that affects the entire body rather than being localized to a specific area. So, what are the consequences of tooth loss? Severe periodontitis can lead to tooth loss, which can cause dietary changes that could potentially lead to nutritional deficiencies. Nutritional deficiencies is a known cause of cognitive impairment and dementia. The act of eating itself directly affects the brain's blood supply. Chewing is a masticatory exercise that promotes blood flow to the brain. The event of tooth loss reduces masticatory activity, which results in less blood flow to the brain and ultimately affecting cognition. I also wanted to add that if you really think about it, if you're in pain, you don't exactly want to eat, and that can cause these nutritional deficiencies as well. Here's a deeper dive on this topic. A study in 2013 found that lipopolysaccharide, a component of Porphyromonas gingivalis, an oral bacterium, was detected in 4 out of 10 brains with Alzheimer's disease. P. gingivalis is a pathogen found in periodontal disease and also in systemic conditions such as Alzheimer's and heart disease. The nature of these pathogen evades host defenses, which causes the promotion of chronic inflammation due to many virulence factors. Virulence factors of P. gingivalis allow the crossing of the blood-brain barrier, induce neuroinflammation, and promote neuron damage and amyloid plaque. Amyloid plaque are abnormal protein deposits that form in spaces between of nerve cells in the brain. I would also like to add that Kesovalue, the doctor who is responsible for leading the study, I will be having the opportunity to perform further research for him this upcoming semester at University of Florida while being a student at Florida State. So here are the main takeaways. There is evidence of a relationship between poor oral health and worse neuroimaging profiles of brain health. While this is an evolving study, let's address the limitations. The study is limited to cognitive outcomes that are evident in older persons. Interventions focused on improving oral health may reduce the likelihood of developing cognitive impairment, and dementia require confirmation through more clinical trials, as these are modest sample sizes. So the best preventative way for Alzheimer's that many people don't come to think of immediately is oral hygiene. And as a dental assistant at FSU, I can see that periodontitis is a rising disease and it's fairly preventable just by practicing good oral hygiene. I know that flossing and brushing might sound tedious after a long day, but you're really doing yourself a service in the long run. So that is my presentation. Thank you for listening, and let me know if anyone has any questions.
Thanks, Lily. We have 3 minutes for questions, so feel free to throw those in the chat or ask Lily directly.
Yeah, I've got a question. With that being said, that practicing good oral habits helps. Is there anything in specific besides brushing your teeth and flossing that you can do on like a day-to-day basis that can really kind of prevent that from happening?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. So I'm just going to tell you what the doctors I assist tell the patients. Um, it's kind of impossible to avoid sugary foods and drinks. I mean, I do it. Who doesn't like to eat those kinds of things? So after meals, I really recommend just maybe having a mouthwash after. I mean, I know brushing your teeth after every single meal or snack isn't exactly ideal, but maybe being more conscientious of what you eat and having those processed foods in moderation. And another tip is when you floss, there is this mouthwash. It's called ACT. You can get it from any drugstore. Um, and you dip your floss in that mouthwash, and that way you can get in the interproximal spaces of your teeth, because flossing, unfortunately, a lot of people don't know the proper technique to floss. So I think that when you tell people to just brush and floss, it leaves a lot of room for error. I mean, before I had my dental assisting job 3 months ago, I was also oblivious to this kind of knowledge, which I think leads to another conversation about oral hygiene instruction. But thank you. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Um, so Ms. Kaya asked if I plan on further methodology to analyze the relationship between oral and brain health in terms of focusing on a specific group of participants. Yeah, that's a good question. So the study that I plan to do under the guidance of Dr. Casavallo in the fall, he's focusing on how patients specifically with dentures react with how their bacteria are similar to those found in rats when they have that P. gingivalis bacteria that I mentioned earlier. So first, he's kind of isolating one group, those with dentures first, and then I know that in his future study, it's going to be focused on those who already have like rising levels of periodontitis. I'm sorry, it's kind of difficult to explain in layman terms, but I can absolutely follow up on you with that.
Thank you. That's great.
Of course, and then Martin asked, is poor mental health a cause of poor dental health, or is poor dental health a cause of mental health issues? That's a good question. It could be both. Poor mental health, I mean, depression being one of them. If someone is depressed, it makes it harder for that person to take care of themselves. So that could lead to poor dental health. And poor dental health could reversibly be a causation of mental health issues because, like I said, those inflammatory mediators, they do affect your bloodstream, and it's not just a localized area anymore. So that kind of leads to another conversation of how issues in your mouth can affect your larger health outcome.
Great. Thank you, Lily. And so now we are going to jump over to our next presenter, Abigail. So Abigail, whenever you're ready. And then if anybody has any other questions for Lily, we can answer those at the end.
Can everybody see my screen? Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, my name is Abigail Goering. I'm a rising junior. My major is psychology, and this research is conducted under the Europe program. And I worked with my research partner, Ethan Mesmer, and I conducted this research under the guidance of Dr. Taylor Higgins. Our project is titled Evaluating Family Leave Policies in University STEM Departments. Our goal was to explore how institutional parental leave policies may affect gender equity, particularly the retention and recruitment of female faculty in engineering and other STEM fields. To begin, we know that women remain underrepresented in many STEM fields, especially at higher academic ranks. For example, while 34% of doctoral degrees in the physical sciences go to women, only 23% of those go to engineering. One significant barrier to the retention of motherhood is family planning. Studies show that stigma around family responsibilities discourage many women from staying in academia. Poor or unclear leave policies often make this worse. Men in academia are generally not penalized in the same way for family formation. So we aim to examine whether the quality of the university's leave policy impacts the number of tenured or tenured track female faculty. Our central hypothesis was the comprehensiveness of the university's parental and family leave policy directly contributes to the retention and recruitment of female faculty on the tenured track. We wanted to see whether better policies were associated with stronger gender representation in academic STEM departments. So my main responsibility and contribution to this project was designing and refining a family leave policy rubric. It had 3 different objectives, scoring 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. The first objective was the restrictions on the parental policy. This looks at the accrual rate if both parents are employed at the university, if they're able to split that, or if they're both able to take the leave. We also looked at, in restrictions, how accessible it was to find the leave policies. Some universities, the leave policy was extremely difficult to find. Others, it was in the HR document for that. The second category was the number of months of paid leave a university offers within a 4-year span. And the third category is the number of births supported. Some universities, like FSU, it's only 2 births within your entire career on the tenured track, while other universities, you can have X amount of children. So that's kind of the difference between the 2 categories there. This approach gave us a clear picture of whether the policies were symbolic or actually functional for faculty who are actively parenting. In reviewing these policies, I looked at documents posted by universities' HR and academic affairs. Many of them could be vague or embedded in legal terms. So I had to interpret that, not just what was written, but was also missing. For instance, some policies only cover birth mothers or require the use of sick leave before paid leave is activated. Others have higher accrual thresholds that essentially delay accessing these benefits. I made sure that a rubric counted for restrictions, eligibility criteria, and clarity. An example of a perfect scoring school was Arizona State University. They scored a 5 in each category. They had minimal restrictions to none restrictions. Both parents, if they were employed at the university, were able to have these benefits, which is amazing because most schools don't offer that, especially because they offer 12 to 15 weeks of paid leave per birth. So they can have as many children as they want with 12 to 15 weeks, which is 15 weeks is a full semester. So the parent doesn't have to come back mid-semester and things can go awry for students, teachers, TAs, everything like that. After developing this rubric, I conducted a systematic review of family leave policies at the sample of U.S. universities, those highly ranked, hold on, sorry. My PowerPoint isn't, okay, sorry, my PowerPoint wasn't working. So we compared the rubric scores to the U.S. News and World Report rankings for engineering schools in 2025. The x-axis shows the rubric scores for each university, which ranges from low, so less comprehensive policies, so lower scores, to high, more generous and accessible leave policies for parents. The y-axis shows the school's engineering ranking from the U.S. News and World Report, with lower numbers representing higher ranked institutions. So 1 closer to 0 is like the top engineering school. The dotted line is the trend line, and the R-squared value is 0.5726, which indicates a moderately strong negative correlation. That means as the rubric score increases, in other words, the leave policies become more stronger, the numbers tend to decrease, meaning the schools are more highly ranked. This trend supports our hypothesis. Top-ranked institutions are more likely to have stronger family leave policies. While correlation doesn't imply causation, it's meaningful that nearly 60% of the variance in rankings can be explained by these policy scores. A key takeaway is that robust family leave policies tend to cluster in more competitive and prestigious institutions, which is important to note for how policies at larger institutions can support female faculty, especially in STEM. We also looked at the number of tenured track women compared to the rubric scores. So I went in and counted the number of tenured and tenured track women in the college. And we compared that to the rubric score, and it also had similar data there as well. So far, our data supports the idea that well-structured family leave policies are important tools in promoting gender equity, especially in STEM. However, we also recognizing that there's other factors like institutional size, funding, and history also play a role in these rankings and influencing demographics. Still, we believe our rubric provides a useful framework for evaluating how supportive these environments truly are. Our next steps are we are looking at the female faculty and comparing the number of female faculty to the rubric scores. We're also sending out a survey across STEM departments within FSU to gather firsthand experiences within the leave policy, how faculty feel about FSU's family leave policy, and it's a firsthand experience there. Additionally, we plan to update each rubric scores continuously and build data requests from departments so we can review and see how we can improve these policies. I would like to give a shout out to Dr. Taylor Higgins for all her guidance and work throughout this project, and also Dr. Andrea Meltzer for their guidance and support on this project. Their mentorship shaped both the direction and execution of this work. And then these are some references for the reviews that we did, if you care. So yeah, questions?
Thanks, Abigail.
Of course. Thank you. I don't even know how to pronounce that, but thank you so much. Any other questions or comments, concerns?
Did you look at kind of like industry standards in other areas, like comparing it to academia?
Like, you mean like outside? No, like different companies?
Mm-hmm.
No, we didn't. I'm sure that that needs to be explored, and that could be a further exploration for this data. But this was like the first year, and this was like a passion project for not only me, but my mentor. She's in the College of Engineering, so this is outside of her framework. But I hope that we can get there one day, especially for women. It's very important to have things that support them to be able to provide for their family and to provide to the workforce as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
And Nancy says, you said that the correlation was especially strong for women in STEM. Any idea why this is less of an issue in the humanities, etc.?
So just in this project, we just looked at STEM. We weren't exploring the humanities. Like Alicia said, we haven't gotten there yet. I'm sure the data is going to be similar, but we just haven't gotten there yet. But I would love to, further exploration to get that to you one day. But this is the beginning of this research, so yeah.
Great. Thanks, Abigail. So if anybody has any other questions, we can ask those at the end.
Hi. Since its earliest days, music has been an essential part of the American circus. Traveling around the country, Circus has introduced Americans to sights and sounds otherwise inaccessible to many in an era before radio and television. My name is Jane Cohen, and today I'll be giving you a close look at the music of American circus bands between 1880 and 1944, as well as the relationship these bands had with the culture around them. This presentation is a brief overview of my honors in the majors thesis, and through this project, I hope to broaden the current understanding of popular music at the turn of the 20th century while demonstrating how interconnected the entertainment world was in this era. Let us begin with a brief history of the American circus. Circuses have existed in the United States since the late 18th century, but until the Civil War, they were typically small companies that traveled regionally on horse-drawn wagons. After the Civil War, shows got bigger and added more ring, allowing for more simultaneous performances. To transport these massive productions, circuses began traveling by rail, which also allowed them to cover much more ground. This study focuses on the period between 1880 and 1944, which marks an extended golden age of the railroad circus and sees the circus rise in terms of production scale and fall in terms of associated events. While the circus was being revolutionized by the scale and grandeur of the railroad show, things were also changing in the world of music. In the early 19th century, the distinctions we have today between popular and classical music did not exist, or at least were considered in a different way. As the century progressed, composers like Mozart and Beethoven became separated as something special and sacred, while opera, once an entertainment for the masses, became something only for the elites. As people in the upper classes began separating forms of culture into high and low art, the circus clearly landed itself in the realm of low art. However, it continuously tried to make itself more reputable by marketing itself as educational. Music on Circus Day took many forms. When a circus came to town, an audience member typically first heard music in the parade, which went through the city and attracted audiences with sights and sounds, including bands and calliopes. After the parade, audiences made their way to the circus grounds, where they could begin their adventures in the sideshow tent. Like in the parade, music was used to allure people into the tent, where they could witness human beings with strange talents and appearances. After you'd had your fill at the sideshow and seen the animals in the menagerie, you would make your way into the big top tent. While you found your seat, a band would be playing from the center ring. As the show began, those musicians would then make their way to the bandstand, where they would play continuously to accompany all the acts of the circus. After the show, if you still had appetite for more excitement and still had a few pennies in your pocket, you could stay for the concert, a vaudeville-style variety show that featured music. Not every circus included all of these attractions, but it is still fair to say that live music was heard constantly throughout Circus Day. The bands that played for these events can typically be divided into two categories: big show bands and sideshow bands. I define the big show band as the ensemble that played under the main tent or big top to accompany the action of the show. This band would also play in the center ring concert and in the parade. Some members of this group would also form a small orchestra for the after-show concert. With very few exceptions, every musician who played under the big top was a white man. These men had very little formal music education, but that was not uncommon in that era, even for professional musicians. These men joined the circus as a way to make a living, but also to live a life of adventure. Circus work was not the only form of itinerant entertainment at the time, but it was certainly one of the most demanding and most exciting. The music of big show bands took many forms. Of all types of music, the one most commonly associated with the circuit has to be the march. Upbeat and full of dynamic extremes, marches were ideal for parades and also matched the energy of many circus acts. Two of today's best-known march composers, Carl King and Fred Jewell, began their careers in the circus and wrote several of their most famous marches there. However, not every circus act fit with the surging energy of a march. Another popular genre of music under the big top was the waltz. One notable composition in this style is Crimson Petal Waltz, composed by the aforementioned Fred Jewell, a favorite of the star aerialist Lillian Lightsoul. Much of the music of circus bands blurred the line between classical and popular. For example, in 1909, the Barnum and Bailey Circus Band played music by composers including Wagner, Bizet, and Tchaikovsky, who today are considered classical greats, but at the same time were modern, cutting-edge composers that were not yet fully welcomed into the classical canon. However, many audience members would have been already familiar with these pieces. Next, let's shift our attention to the other main type of circus band, the sideshow band. During the circus day, sideshow bands performed in the circus parade and then played under or near the sideshow tent. While big show musicians were almost always white men, sideshow musicians were more diverse. Most frequently, these bands were made of entirely African American performers. Like their white counterparts under the big top, sideshow musicians typically had little formal music education. However, performances of these black sideshow bands varied drastically from the big show bands. While big show bands were mostly background music to other acts, sideshow bands were an attraction on their own. However, this attraction usually took the form of a minstrel show. Previous generations of minstrel performers had been white people dressing in blackface in order to exaggerate racist stereotypes, but by the late 19th century, minstrels actually of African descent became common. As Sakina Hughes writes in her book, Music, Muscle, and Masterful Arts, Black and Indigenous Performers of the Circus Age, quote, "The idea that blackface performers could benefit African Americans seems contradictory on many levels. However, when viewed in terms of a labor market, African Americans emerged as victors in an industry that at one time both demeaned and excluded them for performance roles. Even with Black performers, minstrel shows still reinforced harmful racist stereotypes, and I do not wish to glorify this. However, from the perspective of the performers, it was a rare way to gain a footing in an entertainment industry that otherwise did not want them. In fact, by the turn of the 20th century, many minstrel companies, both in circuses and in the touring theatrical circuit, were owned by Black entrepreneurs. Returning to the performances, a typical sideshow minstrel performance featured songs and skits that mocked African American culture and harkened back to the days of slavery, but they also featured new compositions in genres that would come to be considered ragtime, blues, and jazz. While we consider minstrel songs and jazz as very different genres today, at the turn of the 20th century, all music created by Black musicians was grouped by outsiders into the same category. As Lynn Abbott and Doug Suroff mentioned in their chapter Blues for the Sideshow Tent, quote, "To the popular music industry and the contemporary white audience, ragtime and coon songs were virtually synonymous. So while Black performers had few opportunities other than performing in minstrel shows, they could use this medium to spread their own styles of music. In all, there were many similarities between the careers of big show and sideshow circus musicians. Musicians of both bands had little formal musical education, but were skilled artists who joined the circus as a way to learn a living while also living a life of excitement. Additionally, both bands served as auditory advertising for the circus at large, attracting visitors to come to the show and spend their money. Finally, although the bands played different types of music, both played a combination of traditional favorites and new compositions. However, there were also many key differences between the lives of big show and sideshow musicians. For a big show musician, playing in a circus was just a job. White musicians were able to bounce between different performance opportunities throughout their career, playing in circuses and dance halls, but also military bands and symphony orchestras. Meanwhile, for Black musicians, a career in the circus sideshow meant a lot more. Although their participation in minstrel-themed productions was controversial back then, as is now, Black sideshow musicians were welcomed by African American communities in the places they visited. These musicians were trendsetters, both in terms of the music they played and the paths they forged in the entertainment industry. As veteran sideshow bandmaster P.G. Lowry wrote in 1901, quote, "It is generally understood by the public at large that circus people have a tough time. I deny the assertion and say, for good treatment, equal justice, and sure salary, give me the circus." I've talked at length about the big show and sideshow bands, but there are a few other types of circus bands worthy of mention. First of all, circus parades were a great way to introduce musical novelties, including calliopes, bell wagons, and Revolutionary War-inspired drum corps. Another popular act, both in parades and under the big top, was the clown band, first introduced in 1897. It is also worth noting that while sideshow bands were most frequently comprised of all Black musicians, occasionally the sideshow was home to musicians of other minority groups. Women were rarely found in circus bands, and when they did, they were usually presented as featured soloists. However, all female bands did occasionally find a home in the sideshow. Additionally, in the late 19th century, sideshow bands were sometimes comprised of entirely Italian musicians, as this period saw a large wave of Italian immigration to the United States. Just like with the African American bands, the relegation of female and Italian American performers to the sideshow reveals that regardless of the talent of the musicians, their identity caused them to be labeled as a novelty. In conclusion, studying circus bands provides us with a brief glimpse into the complicated institution that was the American Railroad Circus at the turn of the 20th century. This golden age had many flaws, but its impact on American culture should not be understated. Stories of music history rarely address circus music, but music was one of the many things the circus spread to Americans who could not have experienced it otherwise. Today, the circus of the past is often painted as something either good or bad, but I hope that this project demonstrates that labels like this do not accurately display the nuance at play. I believe it is more accurate to call the circus a product of its time. It featured many novel attractions, but it rarely presented truly revolutionary ideas. Instead, it capitalized on beliefs popular amongst middle-class white Americans who ruled society. And here are my references.
Great. Thank you, Jane. So we'll take some questions now. So Carrie asks, such a unique topic. What drew you to this research?
So I'm a double major in music and history. So obviously this is a project that combines two of those niches. As for the circus, that's kind of been one of my pet interests my entire life. I first saw the FSU Circus at the ripe old age of 3 months, and got into circus history in middle school. So it's been really great to take something that I've been interested in, two things that I've been interested in for really my whole life, and combine them and get to really analyze them at an academic level. And then Dr. Rogers asked, it's very obvious how popular music influenced circus music. Are you aware of the reverse? Definitely in terms of the composers who toured with the circus, a lot of people, like I mentioned, like Carl King and Fred Jewell, began their careers as circus bandmasters and then went on to kind of become regular composers and leading municipal bands. And so some of their compositions that were specifically for the circus entered the repertoire. Like I've played some of Carl King's marches in middle and high school. I've also found some brief mentions of certain circus stars using like Tin Pan Alley songs in their acts, and possibly that could have been a way to popularize that. And that's something I haven't gotten to look into super deeply yet, but I'm planning to in the future. some of the circuses in the US have music in different languages. So I didn't get to explain too in detail the scope of my study, but I was looking specifically at instrumental music. There was occasionally some vocal music with lyrics included in circuses. Singing clowns were a thing for a while, but by the 1880s and 1890s, the shows were just too big for that. You've got up to like 15,000 people under a single tent in an era before amplification, and so loud wind instruments and steam-powered calliopes and drums were really the only things that people could actually hear. So really, there wasn't a lot of spoken language in the circus at all by that point.
Great. Thank you, Jane. And up next, we have our last presenter, Alejandro. So Alejandro, whenever you're ready, feel free to share your screen.
All right. Can anyone see this?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I'm a little confused. Hold on, let me sure this is working. Okay, awesome. Hello. My name is Alejandro Valdivia. I am a rising senior, and today I'll be discussing some of my work on my honors thesis, Memories of El Cid, Notions of Holy War in High Medieval Iberia. Before I begin, I would like to thank my research mentor, Dr. Benjamin Dodds, for his mentorship, as well as the Department of History for their guidance. So, I'm sure many of us were taught about the Reconquista during grade school, and usually this event is framed as a centuries-long war by Iberian Christians to regain Spain from Islam. This framing has many issues, most notably due to being developed under the regime of dictator Francisco Franco. It promotes essentialization in the service of nationalism, creating an uncomplicated narrative that erases many historical complexities, which was convenient for the state. Among the figures admired by Francoism was Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, El Cid Campeador, a knight whose story was turned to one of crusading in service of the Reconquista against the Muslims. But this narrative is not true. The First Crusade ended the same year Rodrigo died, meaning that the ideology had just developed. Meaning the ideology had just been developed by the Crusades by the time it reached Iberia by the end of his life. As such, he was operating under different circumstances. But what were these circumstances? This presentation seeks to challenge the notion of Reconquista in medieval Spain as a single centuries-long religious war. By examining the life of Rodrigo and the legend of El Cid as depicted in the 1207 poem of the Cid, I hope to shed light on the ways in which Iberian Christian ideas of holy war, even when impacted by crusading, did not create impassable sectarian lines between Iberian Christians and Muslims, as the Reconquista story suggests. But first, some background. The Islamic Caliphate of Cordoba dominated the Iberian Peninsula and the various Christian kingdoms until the beginning of the 11th century, when civil war began to grip the Caliphate, resulting in its final dissolution in 1031 CE. The Islamic part of Iberia, known as Al-Andalus, fractured into various princely states known as taifas. Around this time, the various Christian kingdoms of the north had been united under King Ferdinando I and his son Alfonso VI, who ruled the kingdom of Leon Castile. This was a crucial switch in dynamics. Now, the Christian north was united, while the Islamic south was gripped by inter-taifa squabbling. The Christians began imposing a tribute payment, pariahs, on the taifas as a form of subjugation and wealth extraction. Nevertheless, what stayed constant throughout was the presence of a frontier society in Iberia that was porous in its nature. Indeed, as we shall soon see, the career of Rodrigo Diaz was molded by this very frontier society. So, who was the historic Cid Campeador? Born between 1040 and 1050 CE near Burgos, Spain, Rodrigo Diaz entered the service of King Alfonso VI in 1072. He served as a prominent knight in Alfonso's court. However, in 1081, he was exiled. He was exiled because he had taken advantage of an incursion in the allied taifa of Toledo to raid the region for himself. Failing to find work for the Count of Barcelona after his exile, he then spent many years as the head of the armies of the Islamic taifa of Saragossa. During this time, Rodrigo would have become familiar with Islamic customs of governance, warfare, culture, etc., and this would heavily influence the course of the rest of his life. During his service at Saragossa, he confronted both Muslim and Christian armies, including Alfonso himself. Alfonso, in the meantime, had captured the taifa of Toledo by exploiting political divisions. This alerted the rest of the taifas, who reluctantly called in the Almoravid Empire of North Africa to fight Alfonso off. They dealt him a devastating defeat at the Battle of Sagrajas. Fearful, Rodrigo was called back by Alfonso, but exiled again on charges of conspiracy. Rodrigo, having built up a combined Christian-Muslim force loyal to him, set his eyes on the Taifa of Valencia, eventually conquering it in 1094. He ruled the city as would a Taifa ruler, only making attempts at Christianization in the last few years of his life. He died in 1099. The capture of Valencia was the greatest achievement of Rodrigo's life, and it was what brought him legendary status after his death. The first known work about him, the Carmen Campi Doctoris, dates to around 1150 and is a Latin poem hailing his exploits. In 1207, the Poema de Mio Cid was produced. This work, today recognized as the national epic of Spain, tells the story of the fictional Mio Cid and his attempts to win back favor and honor with King Alfonso through his exploits. Then, around 1345, a prequel, the Moquedades de Rodrigo, was produced. Its existence demonstrates the continuous evolution of the city and legend well into the late Middle Ages. Indeed, Iberian Christian society had not forgotten the Cid. So then, having discussed the historical context, how did holy war in this period really work? Lords in the rest of Europe warred all the time. In Iberia, this was the case too, but much more religiously infused. For example, Cordoba's ruler, Al-Mansur, constantly warred in the Christian north, including sacking the pilgrimage site of Santiago de Compostela, but he never conquered the north, as he needed constant warfare to maintain his power. And ultimately, this seems to have been more important to him than uniting the peninsula under Islam. Furthermore, his hosts included Christians in it. When the caliphate collapsed, Christian mercenaries played a key role in servicing the Taifa rulers. This can be seen with Rodrigo himself. So then, was this pragmatism taking precedence over religion? In a sense, it could be, although secularism as we think about it didn't really exist. It would be better stated that the mercenaries' actions made sense within their own religious beliefs, and they saw no issue with who they served. As for the notion of Reconquista itself, the Christians did have an irredentist notion that the peninsula belonged to them in the past, but they didn't fight every war in service of this ideal. Rather, it depended on the ruler, on the circumstances, and more. All wars fought by the Christians were never one long fight to regain Spain during this period. After the First Crusade, this status quo started to change greatly. Going forward, the Christian rulers implemented crusading along with their irredentism, resulting in a dramatic push southward based on regaining a lost patrimony through religious warfare. The papacy became more involved in promoting this in Iberia. It banned cooperation with Muslims of any kind, attempting to make something commonplace taboo based on crusading ideology. In other words, what Rodrigo had done would have gotten him excommunicated by the Catholic Church. The Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa saw Christian Iberia united against their Islamic foe, which was the culmination of the efforts of the papacy to implement crusading ideology and prevent fighting among the Christian kings. But there were still exceptions. Alfonso IX of Leon had been the first Christian target of a crusade for attacking Christian rulers using Muslim armies. Also, Muslim cavalry are recorded as serving the kings of Aragon in high capacity well after the Battle of Las Navas. Although Kings Ferdinand III and Alfonso X fully believed in crusading, they did not resort to massacre as their French counterparts often did. They kept the populations they found for their utility. For example, Muslim artisans who remained within the Kingdom of Castile created mudahar art that adorns the inside of palaces and cathedrals from that time. Nevertheless, this should be understood within the context of these kids asserting ideas of supreme kingship rather than generosity. With all this in mind, then, who is the fictional Mio Cid for? Written a little over 100 years after Rodrigo's death, the Poema de Mio Cid is not a black and white crusading story, despite its differences with reality. Even though he no longer serves Zaragoza in the poem, Mio Cid does not massacre Muslims on sight. Distinctions are indeed made between Spanish and African Muslims, and crusading is only directed at the African Almoravids. Indeed, Mio Cid maintains a friendly relationship with a Muslim ruler named Abel Galbon, and who was used as a foil of nobility against the villains, the Christian Infantes of Carrion. Indeed, honor and patience are transsectarian virtues in this poem. There is a contrast in crusading ideals between the Iberian and French characters, which are reflective of real historical stereotypes. For example, Cid's French Bishop Jerome has a thirst for blood that is treated as comical within the poem, which is similar to a French epic called the Song of Roland. But Cid and his Iberian host does not share in this kind of bloodthirst. Thus, the Poema de Mio Cid reflects upon an Iberia whose notions of holy war had changed in many ways, but not in others, in the years since the life of El Cid. Conclusions. Notions of holy war against Muslims changed with the arrival of crusading ideology to the Iberian Peninsula, but it did not establish strict sectarian barriers despite the complaints of the papacy and other parts of Christendom. Rather, it took a form unique to the Iberian situation. 2. The Poema de Mio Cid portrays characters, tropes, and ideologies in a manner that suggests how Iberian Christians incorporated crusading ideology in a way that made sense to them. And in doing so, it reflects upon society that understood its relationship with Islam to be much more complex than the traditional Reconquista narrative suggests. Thank you.
Thank you, Alejandro. Any questions for our presenter? Annabelle Ruiz. Fascinating research, Alejandro. Thanks for sharing. Do you have any insights into El Cid's role in the formation of current Spanish national identity and his depiction in recent media or educational materials?
Yes, of course. This phenomenon is something known as medievalism, which is not what my project is about, but I did get exposed to a lot of it during my research. Basically, El Cid became extremely famous in Spain during the dictatorship for a few reasons. It was part of the greater romanticization of the period itself, but specifically, a lot of his fame is due to a movie that was made that became really popular, not just in Spain, but I think here too. Um, and ever since, you can find El Cid in just about anything. He's used for tourism. He's put in video games. He's been used for like even children's cartoons and comics and stuff like that. He's definitely emblematic of a sort of like projected Spanish past that in my opinion didn't really exist in the way that people talk about it now. So yeah, I would say he is very, very important in the formation of the national identity. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions?
Actually, yeah, Alejandro, I was just wondering if you needed to do any archival work for this, or how did you get access to these primary sources?
Of course. So when it comes to the nature of archival research in medieval studies, I guess the bar of entry is way higher because all of the primary sources are usually in medieval Latin, which requires a graduate education usually. However, scholars have done a great job of translating a lot of the most important texts, and so thankfully, I haven't really been missing anything important. The sources that I found, most of them are thankfully very easily accessible here at FSU, but there were a few exceptions, and those exceptions I ended up finding in Madrid. And it did take a bit more looking for, especially this one right here. This was a Islamic chronicle written that is contemporary with the life of Rodrigo, and that was extremely hard to pin down, but a translation did exist. So I'm very grateful for that.
Great. Any final questions for Alejandro or any of our presenters? We still have a few. Sandra asks, were most of the sources in Old Spanish or were some sources also in Arabic?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's so I always have a great time explaining this to people that in terms of the sources that are actually contemporary to the life of El Cid, there only exist 4. 2 of them are Christian and 2 of them are Muslim. That's a pretty even distribution. Going forward, though, the sources start to lean heavily in favor of the Christians, mainly because El Cid continued to live in their collective memory while he was mostly forgotten in the Islamic world after some centuries had passed. It was really interesting looking at these 2 perspectives, mainly because, Rodrigo is a character who has, he experienced both worlds to the point of being labeled as a Mozera by some, which basically means a Christian living in Al-Andalus. I guess, yeah, thankfully, there's a good amount of these sources that really give me a varied perspective, and that is really important for a project like this.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Alejandro, and our other student presenters. That is it for 2025 Summer Research Day. If you have any questions, please feel free to send us an email at cre@fsu.edu. We'll be sending out a recording of this event later this afternoon, if not tomorrow. But again, thank you all for attending and for the excellent questions. I'm sure our student presenters appreciated it. And thank you all for listening to them. All right, and I hope you have an excellent afternoon. Thanks all.